the fourth and final session of this year's YP YPImbizo. It's my privilege to welcome all the attendees to this session. The theme of the session is technology and engineering innovation. And it is my privilege to be the moderator of the session and to welcome our speakers. According to the schedule, we have 5 speakers, but unfortunately, Sachin Rajkumar is unable to be a panelist on this particular session. But we are really hoping to connect with Sachin or somebody else from Sanral in the future. Hopefully there'll be another opportunity. So the speakers that we do have today are Zamani Ngidi, Cassandra Bridge-Mohan, Zama Mhlanga, and Pravir Parbu. So I am going to welcome Zamani Ngidi as our first speaker, who will be speaking about expansion of technology, cybersecurity challenges. Zamani, thank you. I see your video's on. You're welcome to start sharing your screen. And in the meantime, I'm going to read out your bio. So Zamani is currently the client manager for Aon Cyber Solutions based in South Africa. He leads in cyber advisory engagements, delivering cyber quantification and program optimization to commercial clients operating within Africa, and has written various white papers and articles on cyber. He has been working for Aon for the past 7 years in various roles, starting in Aon Hewitt, assisting with the accounting and administration of retirement funds. He obtained his qualification in risk management from the University of South Africa, as well as completing his master's dissertation with Salford Business School. He is an associate member of the Institute of Risk Management South Africa and a qualified ISO IEC Information Security Lead Auditor. He was accepted in the Aon graduate program while he assisted in delivering corporate broking solutions in the public sector and learned invaluable client interaction skills with experience in the South African insurance market. He then moved to the Aon Global Risk Consulting team while conducting skills transfer with the Aon UK offices in other aspects of risk management, specifically cyber risk and risk finance. Thank you, Zamani. You may start your presentation.
Georgie, much appreciated. So hopefully you guys can see my screen. I was looking for confirmation, but I'll push on. So I guess first and foremost, thank you to everyone for giving me the opportunity to speak. It's very, very difficult to try to touch in a traditional value piece such as engineering and consulting specifically to something that has a digital twist, but I will do my best to try to articulate what's happening from a global perspective, as well as some key aspects of what is happening around obviously growth and innovation, but secondly, the risks that are emanating from those operations. So I guess to kick things off, the way that I'll be breaking this down is just to, again, talk about the growth of those technology assets from a global perspective. What are some of the consequences? What does that actually look like from a business environment perspective? And then touch on what are the risks that are a consequence of utilizing technology, talk about some of the macro risks, specifically around the TMT sector, looking at things such as intellectual property, M&A activity, human capital, supply chain impact, and so on and so forth. So I think to kick off with understanding the growth of technology assets, I think there's an aspect of firstly defining what are intangible assets. So intangible assets are typically things that are difficult to value, typically difficult to insure because of that nature of intangibility, but look at it as the workings that come as a consequence of using data. So things such as trade secrets, copyrights, trademarks. And I think the focus here is that if we look at the past 20 odd years, there's been a huge increase in terms of valuation that has been driven primarily from intangible assets. And going forward, I think that's where a lot of organizations need to spend their time in terms of unlocking that value from a digital aspect, unlocking technology, unlocking different methods to deliver their traditional operating model using that digital twist. And the focus on companies such as Apple, Alphabet, Facebook, and an Amazon. If you think about the incident that happened in 2016 around Cambridge Analytica, thinking about the way that Facebook was essentially using customer data to drive the voting decisions on their platforms using various algorithms that they weren't aware of. And so there's been a lot of developments around things such as data privacy legislation globally to try to spearhead not only the management of that information, but I think fundamentally protecting consumers. And when you get into that piece of saying what is actually happening from a global context and put it back into South Africa, I think more and more we're starting to see not only the regulatory environment adapting to the growth of these technologies and these various innovations, but also an aspect of understanding the risks. We're coming in with obviously POPI and obviously coming in with developed intellectual property laws to drive businesses going forward. I think on the back end of that sort of highlights this is that there's been an increase, an estimated 6 trillion losses from a cyber perspective that were estimated in 2021. I mean, this report was developed in 2019, but we're well on track to get that number. And I think the way that digitalizing your operations, the consequence of that is you have a very convoluted way of delivering your your operations and your value to your consumer. So if you think about supply chain interruption, you think about what is the consequence of a hack that occurred in Transnet a couple of weeks back. How does that impact not only their operations, but subsequent clients, consumers that are impacted as a consequence of not having access to various goods that were supposed to be shipped? And that all comes from an element of using obviously digitalization to manage their logistics, but also around the management of actually that cybersecurity incident. So a lot of these things are starting to evolve, starting to force people into have a really very difficult conversation around how those assets are protected. And again, I think driving the conversation around, not only the use of technology, but the subsequent risks that come out of that. So touching back on the back, on the back end of that, those risks that are emanating from the digital environment, I think we have to look at obviously those economic drivers via automation and connectivity. Think about the technology drivers such as big data, virtual reality. There's been some fantastic use cases around surgical units replicating an organ and getting their surgeons to replicate the surgery process, and they've seen a huge correlation to implementing that technology and also the success rates of the surgical procedures. You look at things such as artificial intelligence, you look at social media, well coveted via use cases such as Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. You look at blockchain, cryptocurrency, and how that's disrupting financial markets, and all of these technology drivers, with them come an assortment of strategic threats that would typically not be in purview of the operations an organization takes on, but those threats look like disruption risks. So a perfect example of that was obviously Transnet. You think about confidentiality risk, the data that organizations have and synthesize and use to come up with different products. You look at things like personal identifiable information, personal health information, intellectual property, and obviously the data privacy laws that govern some of those aspects. You look at supplier risk, right? So the proliferation of the impact of not only digitalizing your organization, but the impact of a risk sort of arising as a consequence of operating in that environment. And from those strategic threats, businesses typically need to now start adopting and acting in different ways in order to make sure that their business going forward is sustainable. So we found that there are key is risk areas that have emanated from a cybersecurity report we developed in 2020. So obviously technology being one of them, but I think some of the aspects I've touched on previously, but you look about and think about things such as mergers and acquisitions. So what we're seeing as a consequence of this huge digitalization drives that typical organizations that are operating in a sphere that wouldn't be traditionally technologically driven are now starting to acquire organizations that have an organizational set, a technological footprint to pivot their operations or to deliver their value proposition in a manner that actually utilizes digitalization. And then obviously the regulatory environment has adapted to make sure that businesses are not exploiting or doing things in a manner that may be poor for the consumer in that aspect. And then as a consequence of that, there's also some liability that boards have to now take, thinking about things such as IT governance, IT security, the way that that environment is secured to make sure that, again, consumers and customers are ultimately protected from this. So I think the last slide here that I'm going to touch on is, I'm honored to be the deputy lead for the TMT practice in EMEA. And what we've seen from the priorities that we've identified looking at that particular industry vertical, so TMT standing for technology, media, and telecommunications, is four key areas, right? So obviously cyber risks and digital risks are really, really important. The second being around intellectual property. The third being around mergers and acquisitions. We've seen about 40 to 60% of the mergers coming out of EMEA being, again, primarily TMT related. And then you think about human capital. So the way that COVID has now forced, obviously, the workforce to mobilize and work from home, there's also another consequence of that. It means that essentially anyone can work, from different parts of the geography. So if you could be in South Africa but working for a company in America. So it's forced companies to think about how do they actually retain talent and think about different ways to actually acquire talent to, kind of leverage things such as the economies of scale. How can you use people from India to run your support staffing, but you're sitting in a business, but your business operations are sitting in the US. And then also supply chain, obviously just touching on, the way and the manner that digitalization is obviously quite convoluted and the way that risks, translates into the business environment. And then you look at something like ESG, right? So, the environment and social governance aspect. How do organizations from a technology standpoint continue to drive sustainability going forward, and making sure that we have a much less impact on the environment going forward. And I think with that being said, I hope that you guys took, I know I had 10 minutes and I think I hit it on the head there, but with that, I hope you guys have found an semblance of some ideas that you can use to incorporate in your organizations and things to think about, and how to go forward in terms of operating your business model. So with that said, Georgia, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, Zanani. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear from you, and just realize our much bigger reliance on VR and AI, social media, cloud computing. With that, there is a much bigger risk in terms of cybersecurity, but it's also great to hear that, there's also a lot of protection for businesses and consumers as that risk grows. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Cassandra Mohan. Cassandra, if you could please put your video on and start sharing your screen, and then I will read out your bio in the meantime. So Cassandra is a professional engineering technologist at Knight Paysold Consulting, KZN branch in the Power and Water Resources Division. She graduated with a Bachelor of Technology degree from the Durban University of Technology in 2013 with cum laude. She has experience in water and sanitation infrastructure, which includes bulk water feasibility studies, the design of bulk water steel and ductile iron pipelines, sewer reticulation networks, rising mains and pump stations, preparation of tender documentation, technical specifications, and contractual claims in the GCC form of contract. Outside of her personal life, Cassandra enjoys spending quality time with her husband and 2-year-old son. Cassandra has been assisted in preparing the presentation, Is the South African Young Professional Ready for Digital Engineering, by her colleagues Tevin Govender and Ishkar Devnath. Thank you, Cassandra. We can see your presentation. You may begin.
Thank you, Georgie. And thank you to the CISA YPF for allowing me to present and engage with you all today. As Georgie mentioned, I'm Cassandra, and I'm a professional engineering technologist at Knight Paysold. And today I'm here to ask, is the South African young professional ready for digital engineering? My presentation today will basically clarify what digital engineering is about and how it's relevant to the South African AEC industry. I'll then touch briefly on the analysis of BIM at universities, as well as BIM implemented in industry today. And finally, I'll provide some advice to my fellow YPs on how to move forward in the digital engineering space and to touch on the role that ICSA and other engineering organizations can play in taking us further into this digital engineering space. Digital engineering is essentially a way of operating or working that uses digital tools to undertake engineering work that to date has largely been done using manual methods. So it uses collaborative workspaces to keep information dynamic, make it accessible to everyone, and it can be updated in real time. Digital engineering is definitely not a substitute for us applying ourselves technically. And it doesn't mean that the computer is going to do the thinking for you. And I know that a lot of the older engineers are concerned that this will become a real problem. There's many aspects to digital engineering. Most of you would probably have heard of building information modeling or BIM by now. And that's the process of modeling an asset in the digital space to facilitate your effective collaborative designs or efficient collaborative designs. Augmented reality is using digital models that are created and virtually superimposing them on a site by using cameras and sensor technology. Virtual reality allows a user to immerse themselves in the 3D models to get an improved understanding of the project. And 3D printing can be used to print components or even structures to facilitate your shorter construction periods, or even gives you the ability to manufacture a structure in parts and to be put together on site at a later stage. Everything that I mentioned might seem a bit futuristic, but the reality is that the first world countries are already seeing the benefits of digital engineering in practice. And if we want to attract more investment into South Africa, we can't afford to continue to operate with outdated methods that are more costly when compared to digital. The savings that are being realized in terms of project costs, reduction in project time, and reduced risks on site are just some of the benefits that come when you operate in the digital space. I have here a video that demonstrates the visual effect that digital engineering has to offer, or the visual advantages. So this is a project that YPImbizo did for Umgeni Water. The project was a multidisciplinary project, and it was a bulk water project where I was involved in the pipeline designs. BIM models like these make spatial planning and clash detection, especially at facilities where you've got a lot of pipes and interconnecting pipe work. It makes it easier to collaborate and easier to visualize clashes. Your collaboration between your disciplines like process engineering and structural and road engineering is so much easily identifiable. I'm sure most of you here are familiar with process flow diagrams for water treatment plants. And through the use of BIM, the process flow diagram, which is normally shown in 2D, can now be seen with real-time simulation through each of the processes. Due to the large scale of this project in particular, we had space constraints. And so to make maximum use of the site, it was achieved we achieved making maximum use of the site by positioning the reservoirs below the treatment plant. The client used the video to present this, the project to funding agencies and non-technical interested and affected parties. The fly-through of the pipeline route shows all the major crossings and terrain challenges. We have found that videos like these are especially helpful when dealing with landowners who find it easier to understand that the impact that the pipeline will have on their properties. And for this project in particular, the surrounding community wanted to see the heritage aesthetic of the surrounding architecture reflected on the site. So the plant was designed to have a village aesthetic. There were also upgrades of the roads to the proposed treatment plant that was a part of this project. And because it was done at feasibility level, the road designs were presented as part of the models. But during detailed design, it'll be possible to simulate the actual traffic flows that will go through to this treatment plant. Looking now at digital engineering in our universities, a paper was written in 2018 by students from the University of Johannesburg titled Use of BIM at Higher Learning Institutions, Evaluating the Level of Implementation and Development of BIM at Built Environment Schools in South Africa. For the paper, the students undertook a study comparing South African universities to those overseas. And what they found was that in the first world countries, the BIM studies at universities were being pushed by governments as mandate through their national frameworks. They assessed BIM in the BRICS countries as well and found that Russia and China were doing the same. Only South Africa, India, and Brazil did not have national BIM or digital engineering frameworks in place. The study also surveyed the level of BIM at the major universities in South Africa. 14 responses were received, and they're shown in the figure shown here. Overwhelmingly, a majority of the responses indicated that no BIM courses were offered. BIM courses are not compulsory, neither was it even offered as an elective. And the training of the faculty to either teach or assess a student's capabilities in BIM wasn't being done either. So this can be an overwhelming thought for the incoming generation of engineers, because soon they'll be required to operate in the workplace on these digital spaces, but they don't have any prior learning. We undertook a survey in preparation for this YPImbizo, and the purpose was to determine the progress of digital engineering in our industry, and in particular, the level of development of YPs in the industry. Although YPs from the consulting, public sector, construction, and supplier sectors were surveyed, we didn't receive enough responses from the public, construction, and supply space. So the results presented here are from the consulting sector. 60% of the respondents indicated that the organization had already begun the process of transitioning into digital engineering, while 59% reported that the organizations don't have dedicated BIM departments or specialists. This means that the BIM processes were being integrated into their departments organically. 86% reported that they hadn't received any formal training in BIM, but 80% showed a desire to be formally trained in BIM or similar applications. Just a positive note, it's not all doom and gloom though. There's some steps that young professionals can take as individuals, and we are seeing that they've already started taking some of these steps to ensure that they are staying abreast of the technological developments that are happening overseas. 60% of the YPs that were surveyed reported undertaking self-studies of BIM applications, doing things like online courses, YouTube videos, and self-study. There's so many tutorials on YouTube for BIM software applications. And for the students here, there's free student versions of most of the software packages. So for those of you who are in university and do want to learn, you can get free versions of most of the software. And as YPs, we can share the knowledge that we gain through our self-studies with our peers. We can use forums like the YPF to take our industry forward. Presently, there's no government-mandated national framework for BIM in South Africa. And this is where the Engineering Council and its voluntary associations have a role to play. And while the national framework is being developed or adopted, we can't afford for our YPs to lag behind our global partners. So this can be remedied by introducing BIM training and into the candidacy training schedules and the courses that are offered from these institutions. To summarize, digital engineering can no longer be considered futuristic or optional. And all professionals, young and old, in the industry need to understand what digital engineering is and how it's applied. There needs to be a concerted effort in developing these skills at tertiary level to enable the young professionals that are coming into the industry to be able to adapt easily. Public and private organizations need to create frameworks for progressive engineering. And EXA and its VAs are so important to our industry's advancements and developments. I'd just like to say thank you to the CISA YPF for hosting me, and a special thank you to my colleagues Tiveng Gavanda and Ishkar Devnath for assisting me in preparing this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cassandra. That was really interesting and great to be reminded that digital engineering is not a substitute for real engineers, but rather it can assist us in our engineering work by actually reducing our costs and reducing risk to a large extent. So thank you, Cassandra. I'd just like to encourage panelists to type any questions that you have into the Q&A panel or the Q&A function. Currently, I think we have about one question. There's time at the end to go through them. So you can direct questions to specific speakers or you can keep them general. Right, I'm going to introduce our third speaker for today, Zama Mhlanga. So Zama, if you could please switch your video on and share your screen, and I will read out your bio in the meantime. Zama is a candidate civil engineer with EXA, working as a project manager at Civil Chem Engineering Services. She holds a Bachelor of Sciences degree from the University of the Witwatersrand and undergoing her final year of her master's degree in engineering management at the University of Johannesburg. Zama has just over 5 years of project delivery in the construction of building, roads, infrastructure, and in consulting services. In her current role, Zama oversees multiple engineering projects and programs, including assessment and construction projects. Zama is part of She Engineers. She Engineers is a women in engineering network where Zama participates as mentor to various graduate engineers. Zama has also been nominated as a participant in a delegation to Swaziland by the South African Research Chair Initiative in Sustainable Construction Management and Leadership in the Built Environment, an initiative at the University of Johannesburg, Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environment for Engineering and Built Environment Research. Thank you, Zama. I can see your screen, so you're welcome to take it away.
Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for the introduction. I just need to check if I'm audible, please.
Yes, you are. We can hear you.
Can you see me on the screen?
I can't see your video, but I can see your screen being shared.
Okay, let me try switch it on, please. Still invisible.
Yes, I can't see your... Oh, wait,
okay.
There we go. I can see you.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Thank you. I'm not seeing my shared screen. I'm seeing someone with my...
I can see your PowerPoint. Have you put it into presentation mode?
Can I just please put it on again? I'm just gonna share afresh.
Okay.
Okay. All right, I think it should be visible now.
Yeah, I can see your PowerPoint. You can just put it into
Okay.
presentation mode.
Oh, yeah. I think it's in presentation mode now.
I can still
On
just
my
see
side.
your... Okay, I can just still see your PowerPoint. I'm not sure, maybe it's...
That's fine.
Yeah, I can still see your PowerPoint, but if you want to present from there, I suppose that's fine.
Yeah, because on my side, it's actually a slideshow now.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, thank you for the introduction. Sorry for the hassle with the glitches. So I'm going to take us through my abstract, and the title for my abstract is an assessment of the applications of Industry 4.0 in construction project management in South Africa. And I'm talking about it from the perspective of construction project management, because any construction project that gets carried out is essentially engineering design work that is being managed. All right, so my contents for my presentation, I'm just going to take you through my abstract. I'm going to explain briefly or outline the purpose of my study. I'll present the research questions as well as the respective objectives for the research that I'm working on. as well as just go briefly into the Industry 4.0 technologies that I look into in relation to the construction industry for managing through construction project management. So my abstract looks into the fact that the construction industry is considered as the biggest labor force employer, as well as a major shareholder in the global economy. So with that being said, one would imagine that the construction sector then would quickly pursue anything that looks like an opportunity for growing the economy or empowering the labor force to continue to be productive. But it has been found, unfortunately, that the pace of adoption of Industry 4.0 in the construction industry, and not only in South Africa, is actually the lowest compared to all other markets in the global economy. That means that if you compare the South African construction industry to industries like banking, manufacturing, and other just global industries in the world, we find that the pace in which the construction industry is adopting the implementation of Industry 4.0 is very, very low. The other concern that has been identified is the fact that even with the existing technologies or available technologies, there is very limited implementation. Just to borrow from the previous speaker, for example, the application or the facilitating of BIM information or teaching is still very limited, but it's something that is being done globally. So that in itself is a concern. And with the research, we look into why that is and how it can be overcome.
Zama, I'm very sorry to interrupt you. Do you mind moving forward on your PowerPoint, just so that we can see where you're up to? On the PowerPoint, it's still on the first slide.
Is it?
On the actual, yeah, on the actual. Great,
Sorry,
thank you so much. Apologies for the interruption, you can continue.
I'm on abstract now, is that the same slide you're on?
Yes, I can see abstract, thank you.
All right, thank you for that. So I'm on the third point, and we're discussing the limited application of already existing technologies within the construction industry. And I've borrowed from the previous speaker who mentioned the lack of teaching of, for example, the BIM application for design and construction and all sorts of interactions that pertain to projects. So it has been found that the application of Industry 4.0 technologies actually increases project output and it improves management efficiency. And what this research that I'm going into looks into is that it is appealing for an investment into science and technology so that construction design and management can move into a more innovative space. There's also been found that in investing in low-cost technology is actually what would cultivate the development into all-round high-tech design, all-round high-tech construction, as well as all-round high-tech management systems. I'm on the next slide. Is it moving, please, if you can confirm?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the purpose of this study is, first of all, to establish the status of the application of Industry 4.0 in construction project management in South Africa. Secondly, it's to assess the alignment of the applications with global trends or developments, especially in line with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So the ones that were the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that were identified in line with this research or this abstract were ones that speak to making industries more innovative, as well as growing the world economy, because it is envisaged that with the improvement of the digitization, as well as automation of industries that contribute so largely to the economy, that then the economy will be boosted, which will speak to one of these goals, as well as the industries will become more innovative. What the research also aims to achieve is to identify research and market gaps in the South African construction industry in line with implementing Industry 4.0 technologies in construction project management. So what this means is that the findings of the research are meant to inform the implementation now of these technologies when they eventually get implemented. It looks at the benefits, the disbenefits, as well as the opportunities for the level of application of Industry 4.0 technologies in construction project management. The research objectives basically align with the research questions, and there's 5 objectives for the research. And the first one is to determine the applications of Industry 4.0 at the different phases of construction project management. So this is to say we're looking at what Industry 4.0 technologies or applications are already taking place globally, and are they taking place in South Africa? And then secondly, we investigate the extent now to which these Industry 4.0 technologies are applied. So for example, if in the first objective we identified that, okay, we have cyber-physical systems, for example, that are being used. We've got Internet of Things being used. We've got blockchain being used for transactions. We've got big data being used. We then assess on the second objective the extent to which these technologies are being applied in construction project management, as well as in the construction industry in South Africa. And then the third objective is to evaluate the extent to which Industry 4.0 is being applied in construction documentation management. And this one was just set apart because there's a lot of documentation that takes place in many construction project management processes in South Africa. And so the aim is to understand how automated or how digitized and how collaborative and available in real time is documentation during construction projects when projects are being carried out. The fourth objective is to determine the challenges that affect the adoption of Industry 4.0. And then the last one is to determine the drivers for the adoption of Industry 4.0. So drivers would be the reasons as to why South Africa should pursue partaking in implementing Industry 4.0 technology. So should it be for health and safety reasons? Should it be for minimizing cost overruns? Should it be for improving project schedules? Or what exactly should actually drive us into pursuing the implementation of Industry 4.0 technologies in construction project management? I'm just going to go through the technologies now that the research looks into, but most of them have been elaborated by the speakers that spoke before me. So the research looks into cyber-physical systems, mainly used in banks and manufacturing, but something that actually has some excellent outcomes in terms of minimizing cost overruns and schedules, whereby it is used in other countries. There's machine learning, there's Internet of Things, there's big data, there's 3D printing, there's 4D printing. 4D printing is actually an extension of 3D printing in that structures that have already been printed using 3D then have a second phase to it, in that they are able to metamorphize over time, maybe to a different shape or to different lengths or dimensions, depending on the temperature, on the weather, or the pH of the material being used, etc. It's still under research or development, but it's something that is also being looked into for many purposes in construction. There's also blockchain and augmented reality, as well as virtual reality. So these are the technologies that the research looks into. You find that when, for example, big data is being applied, we won't have an application whereby we're applying big data on site, but you find that there are certain programs where big data is being used to enable certain processes or certain tasks to be carried out on site through collaborative environments, through real information that is available in real time, etc. So those are the technologies that the research looks into. So with all this being said, I've come to the end of my presentation, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Zama, for sharing your very interesting research with us. And it's so interesting to learn about Industry 4.0 and the application of it and how that can stimulate economic growth, as well as encourage innovation and research within the sector. So thank you very much. I am going to introduce our fourth and final speaker for this session, Pravir Parbu. Pravir, if you could please turn your video on and share your screen. In the meantime, I will read your bio. Thank you. Pravir is a professionally registered civil and structural engineer with extensive experience in commercial, residential, and industrial sector projects. He is the Technical Director and Chief Operations Officer at Aspire Consulting Engineers. He holds both a bachelor's degree in civil engineering as well as a master's in engineering degree from Wits University. In addition to this, Pravir has recently completed his master's in business administration and uses his problem-solving abilities to unlock development opportunities and find innovative cost-saving solutions for his clients. He has been instrumental in the design and development of an alternative building technology walling system that is currently being used in South Africa. Pravir has a passion for all things engineering and keeps up to date with the latest industry trends, new technologies, and innovative building developments around the world. He is an excellent project manager and leader that aspires out-the-box thinking and attention to detail in all his projects. Thanks, Pravir. I see you have started sharing your screen. Okay, I can see it. If you could put it into presentation mode. Great, you may begin.
Okay, hi, Georgia. Just doing a quick mic check. Are you able to hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So I think, yeah, well, thanks for having me on the panel. I think there's been some really interesting talks over the past 2 days. My topic of discussion today is going to be surrounded by the gig economy, and in particular in the context of the South African construction industry. So firstly, what is the gig economy? Around quite commonly nowadays, but no one really knows what it is. And the question is that how does the gig economy fit into the built environment profession, and what does it do to the future of our work? So these are the key topics of today's discussion. So let's start off by first discussing what exactly is the gig economy. So, a few days ago I was at a friend's house and I got a text saying, "I'm here for you." So I felt quite flattered because I said, "Well, thanks. I'm going through a tough time, so it means a lot." But I didn't know really who it was. Happened to be my Uber driver, but awkward. But yes, Uber is one of the gig platforms, and I think it's one of the most popular ones that everyone sort of seems to know. Another one, this is a picture of my house, my holiday home in Dalstrom, and you're all more than welcome to visit because it's actually an Airbnb. Another gig platform. Similarly, I mean, you've got a whole bunch of these, and I think a lot of us know a lot of them in terms of Uber, Airbnb, Bolt, Fiverr, Wag, Mr. D, Uber Eats. We've used them all, and they're all part of the gig economy. So let's take what you sort of already know from interacting with these platforms and convert it into the actual understanding of what the gig economy actually is. So what do Uber drivers and Airbnb hosts have in common? Well, firstly, they choose when they want to work. So they mean that they've got a high degree of autonomy or flexibility in the choice of work. Secondly, they get paid on a per time, you get a monthly salary. You've got to actually sort of do a task to earn your keep. And thirdly, it's a short-term relationship between the client or the customer. These are the three basic definitions, or the three defining criteria as stipulated by McKinsey as being an independent worker. The general definition of the gig economy is the economy is a term used to describe a shift in the global labor market where people or independent workers choose to work on a part-time or contract basis rather than as a long-term or traditional employee. So I think we've all seen this. Now, why would someone do that? Well, the pros and cons of it are as follows, right? So the pros, obviously, you can pick your own clients, you can set your own time. That's really great. They found that millennials really do love this sort of a working arrangement. And I think with the onset of COVID, all of us have had a taste of working from home and having a bit more control in our lives, and we've all appreciated it. On the con side, though, is that you've got to pay for your own benefits. So there's no, as a gig worker, you don't get any company benefits. And you also have a higher degree of financial instability because you don't know where your next paycheck is going to come from. You also have the task of managing multiple clients and projects, and that can be quite challenging if you're running by yourself. So broadly speaking, in literature, there's 4 different groupings of gig workers, and they term the free agents, the casual earners, and the reluctants for financially strapped. And as you can see from the table, there's basically 2 main brackets, and it's either you're a primary income earner or supplementary income earner. What that means is that, well, either I work in the gig economy on a, that's my primary source of income, or I'm working there as a part-time worker. And then you can do it out of choice, out of necessity. So, if you're doing it out of choice, it's like, well, I'm just going to do this to pick some extra cash on the side. Or if you're going to do it out of necessity, it's to say that, well, my primary job doesn't actually give me enough money, so I've got to actually go and work in the economy as well. Let's talk about the size of the gig economy. So, we always followed America, 35% of the workforce sent by the end of 2021. I mean, that's almost half of their population working in the gig economy. In the UK, we see that it's doubled between 2016 and 2019. And we find that currently like 1 in 10 people work in the gig economy. According to Stats SA in South Africa, we're looking at about short-term employment of 2.6 million in 2018 to 3.9 million in 2020. So it's definitely really growing quickly, and it's going to be prevalent in our industry quite soon. So on that note, let's talk about what does this mean for us in the professional services industry within the construction sector. So the South African construction sector employs 1.3 million people. It makes about 3 to 4% of the GDP that was in the 2019-2020 fiscal year. But, according to SECS, we've all been affected by this. We've seen what they're calling a decade of expenditure containment. And what we're seeing there is that there's been reductions in government infrastructure spending, increases in material costs, decreases in profit margins, tell me about it, and generally poor economic conditions. Not to mention COVID-19, the recent looting, and the 5 kilograms my wife came during lockdown. Job losses within the industry are predicted to reach over 140,000 formal jobs by the end of the 2021 year. I mean, this is really scary stuff. Compared to other industries, I'm sure you guys all know, the working times in the construction industry are far longer, and there's a higher prevalence towards, family conflict and job burnout. So, alone. So what does this mean for young engineers? Georgia, are we okay? Can you still hear me?
Yes, Pravira, we can still hear you. There was a slight delay, but I think you're back now.
Georgia? Okay, great. Okay, great. So what does this mean for young engineers? So it's restructurings, closures, mergers and acquisitions, strategies to make organizations flatter. There's increased in non-fixed employment agreements. And then obviously we're seeing the new technologies coming in. Companies are searching for more economical ways of getting the required resources, and individuals are looking at ways of mitigating their job insecurity. And that's where the gig economy steps in. Because thanks to technology, people can be connected to employers all around the world using smart technologies and the internet. So I set out on a research in this regard for my MBA, and I looked at a quantitative study around the Gauteng area, which looked at engineers, architects, QSs, PMs, basically all the built environment professionals. It took over 6 to 8 months to conduct the research. And with regards to what I looked at, 94% of my respondents were in the ages of 25 to 54 years old, majority being millennials. The main research on my topic was to find out, well, how prevalent is the gig economy within our industry or within built environment professionals in particular? So what did I find? Well, firstly, 75% of respondents had a high to medium awareness of the gig economy. That means that people do know about it. And 53% actually partake in it. So more likely than not, most people that you know actually do have side work or are particularly doing some sort of gig work, right? When you look at the breakdown, we find that it seems to be more likely that people supplement their income. If you look at that 64% being supplementary earners and 75% being out of choice. So a lot of people are doing work in the gig economy out of their own choice rather than out of necessity to do so. So we looked at the breakdown then according to firms, right? So the study showed that if you look at firms, basically between small, medium, and large firms, between 19 and 25% of their workforce comprise of gig workers. So for example, if your firm has 10 to 20 people, it's likely that 25% of that is actually made up of gig staff, right? The interesting part though is that if you look at micro enterprises, that's firms that have less than 10% according to the CISA latest employment stats, 125% of those firm staff components are made up of gig workers. And why that's interesting is because the 51% of the respondents actually claim to be working within these micro enterprises. So what we're seeing is that within our industry, you've got a really high number of micro enterprises, meaning that the majority of firms are really small. And we're also finding that within those firms, 125% of their workforce actually is derived from the gig working, from gig workers, which means that there's definitely a prevalence of gig economy within the industry. Interesting enough, 73% of people will supplement their income. So just to bring it all together now, the gig economy is alive in South Africa and will play a major role in the near future. Both environment and professionals are actively engaging with gig workers, and you can see that there's a presence of it in the industry already. Millennials, such as all of us, most people on this platform, require flexibility and enjoy the ability to pursue other entrepreneurial ventures. So, I mean, what does this mean for your firm? What does this mean if you're trying to employ people, but you know that they want to try and do other entrepreneurial activities? How do you combat that? How do you address that? Built environment professionals are definitely moonlighting and might well be competing with their actual full-time employees. And given technology, I mean, we've all got our laptops, we've all got access to all the technology and all the software and all the programs so that you can quite easily go home and actually like sort of do your full-time job for someone else on a part-time basis. I mean, you've got no overheads, you're not particularly paying any rent or the rest. So a lot of people are doing this. They need to take an approach on how do they actually do this. And finally, gig workers need to be protected against being bullied in firms. This was one of the main findings, that workers feel that they don't get the same pay of the limitations of gig workers. You know, everything in our industry now is moving towards the cheapest solution or the most cost-effective, consultants to use. But what does that actually mean? What does that mean in terms of, do they come with PI? Do they come with, have they given it enough time? Is your energy levels at midnight doing a design the same as it is during the day? So we need to be quite careful about it, but at the same time, it opens up a whole huge world of opportunities for young engineers or young professionals to actually start sharing work through these platforms, so that you as a firm don't really need to have all the expertise, or you don't have to pay the overheads of carrying someone, but you can still get the best people in industry working within your firm, thanks to the economy. So just to close off, out of diversity comes the opportunity. So thanks for that.
Thank you very much, Prabir. You didn't share with us how many kgs you gained during lockdown, but we'll take that offline. But seriously, thank you very much for that. It's so interesting to learn a bit more about the gig economy, talking about autonomy and flexibility in the workplace. But it's also great to hear about a bit of a reality check about what the disadvantage side of it is. It'll be very interesting to see how it grows amongst professional engineers. So thank you very much for your presentation. Right, we're going to move on to the Q&A session now. Okay, so we have 3 questions in the Q&A function. I think I will just start by going from the top. If the panelists have already answered the questions, if you wouldn't mind just turning your video on and unmuting just for the benefit of everybody else in the session, that would be great. So the first question is to Cassandra. How do we incorporate digital engineering, e.g. BIM, in undergraduate and postgraduate engineering studies while maintaining the teachings of basic first principles and satisfying the EXA outcomes as at a technician, technologist, or engineering level? Thanks, Cassandra.
Okay, thanks for the question. It is a very good point. And I think what's important to remember is that we don't need to incorporate BIM all at one go. So what's being done internationally is that it is being taught in levels. There are levels of development in BIM. And so the level of teaching is appropriate to the level of schooling. So you would find that the first few levels of BIM are actually being taught in secondary school level overseas. And then it's taken further once you get into university. And even once you're in university, you can do things like, for example, practical modules where you undertake your projects that you would traditionally do, your group projects. You would traditionally do them using your normal methods, but this time around, you can use BIM platforms to collaborate with your groups. And then also, I think it's important to remember that BIM isn't just a drafting tool or a modeling tool. It's a process it's a way of working to allow all of your disciplines to integrate their work together, so that if there's any changes that need to be made, everyone is aware of the changes, and it updates on your side, on your system, at the same time as everybody else, so that there's no lag. So that's where the efficiencies in the project designs come in. Yeah, in terms of the outcomes, you would still be able to achieve your EXA outcomes if you work on a project using your digital platforms, because you would still be doing the engineering side of it and achieving those outcomes.
Thanks, Cassandra. Thank you for clarifying that. The next question we have is for Zama. How can 4.0 tech like blockchain assist in the built environment or engineering? Thanks, Zama.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so they're asking, how can 4.0 tech like blockchain assist in the built environment or engineering? Okay, I'll first answer it generically and then just look at blockchain. So in general, the 4.0, can I just switch on my video like everyone else? Please. Okay, doesn't want to respond, sorry about that. Generically, well, implementation of Industry 4.0 technologies is all about, we got me, is all about improving availability of data, because it speaks to data being available in real time collaboratively. That means something like if work is being done on site and we're constructing a bridge, so for somebody to understand fully what's going on site, they wouldn't have to travel to site, but perhaps by merely logging into their BIM system, for example, they'll be able to extract the status of the project without necessarily leaving their office and going into that space. So it makes data available in real time. It helps with foreseeing complications with projects and being able to have foresight, assist with then coming up with strategies that will eliminate those complications before they take place, and that will help with the reduction of cost overruns as well as schedule overruns. You find that also a lot of Industry 4.0 technologies are used for different types of inspections. It's quality inspections, it's health and safety inspections. It also helps collect data for improving inspection methods as well as health and safety systems. And so what then Industry 4.0 would do is that it would improve these areas which are a concern in construction. So coming to blockchain for assisting in the built environment, I think the outlook is that the construction industry is basically a bloom. It will grow. It's not happening right now in South Africa, so it's hard for me to say it like that. But the outlook or the foresight is that the construction industry will become global. And then now for us to interact perhaps with other global companies, when we perform our transactions, that's where technology like blockchain could come in handy, because it's like it's a ledger that doesn't need third parties. It's very transparent as well. It has a lot of benefits which the current banking systems do not have. And also it's based in current industry or in Industry 4.0 technologies. So it would help with instances like that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zama. The third question is to Pravir. What is your view of allegations of exploitation by gig companies as they aspire to gain a competitive advantage?
So that's a good question. I think exploitation of gig workers is a very hot topic around the world. And I think that companies and platforms, which are quite relatively new, are all trying to find ways of protecting their workers. Unfortunately, gig workers are typically overexhausted and overused because you've got to actually do the work to get paid. You've got no guarantee of payment unless you actually perform a task. So companies definitely would tend to lean on them and exploit them in that manner. But there is a movement towards saying that there should be some legislative laws put in place to protect them. And I think that it is something that's going to take some time to go. And I think as more people enter the gig economy, it's going to become more prevalent. And I think you're going to have more legislation coming in as a result to protect these people. So I think that it's not something which will be sorted out in the short term, but it will definitely over time be addressed.
Thank you, Pravir. I'd actually be interested to hear, Zamani, from your point of view in terms of cyber security. Could you comment on this question?
Could you just repeat the question, please?
So the question is, what is your view of allegations of exploitation by gig companies as they aspire to gain a competitive advantage?
Gig companies. Sorry, I was a bit. To be honest, I wasn't listening really well because I was doing other things. But could you just articulate very high level, what do gig companies do?
Sure, no problem. So gig companies, what Pravira was talking about is like Uber, Airbnb, where people can kind of work part-time or in their own time. So I'm interested to find out from you if you know from a cybersecurity point of view how users of gig companies could be affected.
So the big problem with gig companies is firstly articulating where the liability is, right? So if we look at something like basically a mass aggregator of information, so Microsoft Azure is a perfect example. There was an instance whereby they had a vulnerability that caused a loss that again proliferated throughout their network. So from the perspective of those gig companies, typically what they do as the user utilizing the platform, they'll cut off all liability to say if something happens in our environment whereby there's a cyber related loss, we won't actually be liable for it. So there's one or two things that you need to do. I think firstly, articulate the agreements that you have between your providers, and then the second aspect of that is to understand, as a consequence of those agreements, wherever the liability lies, you need to have some kind of risk transfer mechanism in place. So think about things such as insurance, or create something via some kind of risk management tool like a captive. So that will be the case, but it's about having a little bit of a better understanding around where some of those digital related risks are again segmented and segregated from your business operations.
Thanks, Amani. Apologies for catching you off guard. Okay, no so problem. We've got another question, which is directed to Cassandra and Zama. Cassandra, maybe you could start. The question is, what are the risks associated with adopting a BIM-oriented workflow?
Okay, thanks for the question. I think Zamani might actually be the better person to answer in terms of the risks. I quite enjoyed his presentation and his discussion around the risks. And yeah, so risks in terms of the BIM workflows, there is obviously that cybersecurity risks where we have these online platforms now where you're collaborating and your work is being uploaded to these online platforms. But having frameworks in place to ensure that the correct users have access to the information that's relevant to them and pertinent to them, that's important. And having someone to control the project that is liable for managing who has access to the project database. That's another start. And then obviously the company or whoever's hosting this platform needs to ensure that their security systems are up to date. I'm not sure if Zamani can add to that.
I think Cassandra has a definite future in risk management. I think, very broadly, I think most of the points that she raised were, again, really well, well articulated. If you talk about frameworks and you talk about articulating some of the aspects around using those platforms, again, segregation of liability is of utmost importance. You need to have those agreements, front and center whenever you, whenever you can communicate with the supplier for whatever the case may be. When you think about, segmentation within internal networks, you need to, think about things such as privileges, access to networks, making sure that, you try to restrict access or encrypt that information as best as you can, because, in a scenario whereby that information is lost, there's going to be one or two things that are going to happen. Someone's going to ask you, what did you actually do to protect that? And the second aspect is they're going to try to seek some type of, financial recompense as to, the consequences that happen. So as long as you have some kind of, again, the framework to articulate or at least somewhat understand what risk you're taking on. And the second aspect of that is that if there's a financial component to that, that you have something in play that'll assist.
Thanks, Zamani. Zama, could you comment on that? The question was also directed to you.
About the risks of, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So it's what are the risks associated with adopting a BIM-oriented workflow?
Okay, I actually don't have a direct answer in that I have neither used BIM nor really researched into BIM.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Zama, sorry. Sorry, it actually, sorry, it was actually directed at Zamani. Apologies, but your name was written as, or Zamani's name was written as Zama, so I got confused. Sorry about that.
No
okay, let's move on to the next question. So it's another question to Cassandra. What is the level of BIM adoption from the client side to incentivize the provision of 3D models?
Okay, so currently we're not, because there's no national framework in place, we're not seeing this as a compulsory requirement from government departments on infrastructure projects at the moment. What we are seeing is that a lot of consulting firms, especially those that have their offices overseas and things like that, have already started adopting BIM principles, and especially those who have clients in the private sector. If you have any clients in the private sector, you would find that these clients typically do want these projects implemented using these BIM processes. There are a few government or parastatals that are seeing BIM coming into or seeing the value in BIM. For example, Sandral and I'm Gaining Water are two of the organizations that I know that are starting to ask for their projects to be undertaken using some sort of digital engineering. So we are seeing it come through, but not at the level, not at a national level, or there is no mandate from government at this stage that makes it compulsory for projects to be undertaken on the BIM platform, on BIM platforms.
Thank you, Cassandra, for clearing that up. There's another question for Pravir. So many smaller companies find it difficult to implement digital engineering due to the high upfront costs relating to software, etc. Can the gig economy bridge this gap?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely a place where the gig economy can definitely help. If you register your company as a specialist drafting office, for example, someone would be able to find your company online and actually then employ the services for that. And if you're a company which is looking for some specialists around the world, you may not have access to the technology which they do. And that's exactly where the gig economy comes in, that you don't actually pay for the own technology, but you can get access to these individuals thanks to these online platforms.
Thanks, Pravir. So that's all from the Q&A side, but I see that there are some questions in the chat. Okay, so there is a general question to all the speakers, and it says, do the speakers think that if we bring in these efficiencies as a society, we can then work less because we are being more productive? Or will businesses make us keep performing in the same way and have even more output? So maybe Pravir or Cassandra, could you start? One of you could unmute and start with that, and then any other speaker is welcome to join in because it is a general question.
Okay, so sorry, Pravir, I'll just go first there. It does make us more efficient and productive, but I don't think that the amount of work that we're doing is lessened. I think it's just that we are taking out certain risks in terms of or delays that we would typically see on a traditional method of working. Those are now being reduced. So your project durations are being reduced, but it doesn't mean that the amount of work is necessarily reduced. I'm not sure if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, and I think just building on that, typically what you find is that, you know, an increase in efficiency doesn't make you productive, but that you can work, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that you finish the task and there'll just be nothing left. So I think that do get through a project quicker, and it takes much less resources to do a project today than it did 10 or 20 years ago, thanks to technology. And that's going to that's going to continue to evolve. I mean, we used to have a lecturer at university which always used to say that, you know, in the next 20 years, we'll all be, because
Pravir, I think we have lost you. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Okay, I think we might have lost you, so I'm going to move on. There are two more questions, one relating to Pravir and one to Cassandra. So I'll just start with the one to Cassandra, just so that we can wait for Pravir. Okay, so Cassandra, what steps would you recommend to private organizations for venturing into digital engineering, like using BIM?
Okay, sure. That is a point of interest for most companies at the moment. And, you know, despite me saying that there's no national framework, there is a South African national BIM guideline that's available. It's available freely from the BIM Institute. The BIM Institute is a nonprofit organization. So they've prepared this guideline to guide South African companies on how to set up projects in BIM, how to set up your teams correctly, and how to implement a BIM project in your organization. So, you know, there is tools available online, and this one specifically is based on the US structure that they are using in terms of BIM. So it is an already tried and tested framework, rather. So it can be used, obviously, with adapting it to your company's specific requirements. Yeah, I think that's important.
Thanks, Cassandra. Pravir, I see you are back. So there's just another question for you. Do you feel like, since people in South Africa are incorporating gig economy in our working lives, that the tertiary education system will need to be adjusted to allow students to accommodate multidiscipline in their studies? Also, if this is done, will it open a door for companies to exploit employees under the assumption that the employees will be doing gig work? I think this relates to a previous question, so if you could please comment. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I think the computers heard me talking about them, so they cut me off. But coming to this question, I mean, I think that, you know, gig work, it looks at two aspects like we had discussed. It can either be a primary source of income or supplementary. And I mean, it could be within your industry or out of it. So I think that if you as an individual have a multitude of skills or a multitude of talents that you could sell in the market, that's completely up to you. I mean, nothing stops you from having multiple interests or studying or pursuing multiple careers, other than your time that you can actually spend on each one of them. So whether, you know, we should incorporate that into our education system, I'm not too sure about that, because I think that that's completely up to the individual. But I do think that there's definitely a need to incorporate at least digital training in all of our schools and you know, tertiary education, so that people are aware of what it is that's available and how you connect to people around the world. Because we are, I mean, that's the future of business, really.
Thanks, Pravir. So there's another question in the Q&A directed to Zama and Cassandra. It says, I went to UJ where an introduction to BIM was done and an expectation to make use of digital engineering within our prescribed work was communicated. However, it has always communicated that the engineer and the BIM specialist each have different roles, and these two can never overlap. How is this implemented and managed in industry? So Zama, would you like to answer that first?
I think because Cassandra has the experience and has worked on BIM projects, she can answer. Unfortunately, I've never worked on such. Thank you.
Sure. So what I've found is that the engineering professionals are still asked to work on BIM platforms. And the feedback that we received from the survey also shows that a lot of the companies, so a lot of the respondents said that the companies had already moved into the BIM space, but most of them said that they don't have BIM departments or BIM specialists. So we're also seeing that there is that definite overlap in terms of responsibilities. It is possible for a technical staff, a technical member of the team to operate in BIM, but there is a lot of project management as well when it comes to hosting a BIM platform or hosting a project on BIM. And those project management duties, we generally find we as engineers are doing them anyway when we manage a project. So it's just managing it digitally in this space. In terms of the drafting, I think the drafting aspects are still being done by draftspeople. So that's where the differentiation between the BIM and engineering comes in.
Thanks, Cassandra. So it doesn't seem like there are any more questions in the Q&A platform or the chat, or just comments. So from my side, I just want to thank the panelists for participating in this session. And for me, it's really interesting to hear how technology and engineering innovation, how much we can actually really look forward to that in our industry. There's so much, there are many examples that each panelist gave of international examples, and it really is in certain countries flourishing, but it's very exciting to see how it's going to start flourishing in our country. So thank you. What an empowering and encouraging talk that we have had the privilege of listening to. Let me just see, there might be some more questions. Okay, I mean, it does look like we do have time, so maybe I could take a few more questions. Okay, so there's a question. Please share your thoughts on companies that look at hiring BIM specialists and in turn decreasing the amount of engineers, technicians. So I assume this is directed at Cassandra again. Thanks, Cassandra.
Okay, like I said, we still have to apply our minds, especially in terms of the technical and engineering side. The engineering doesn't go away from operating on a BIM space. So I think that is a lack of understanding of the application by not hiring engineers or technicians because you think that a BIM specialist has this understanding that we get from our studies. The thing is, we understand the first principles, we understand the engineering behind certain decisions that sometimes someone who's purely trained in BIM doesn't understand. So that's very important to keep the engineers in this space because they are the professionals who are registered and who, especially in terms of professional engineering, are liable as the engineers. So yeah, it is very important to keep that technical experience in there.
Absolutely. And yeah, as many speakers have said, there's no replacement for real human engineers. Zama, your hand is up. Would you like to comment?
Yes, thank you very much. Cassandra, correct me if I am mistaken, but from my understanding, just to elaborate to the person that asked the previous question that Cassandra just answered. So what BIM does is that it facilitates collaboration, just to simply put it. It facilitates collaboration. So it doesn't necessarily replace what the engineer does. It doesn't necessarily replace what the project manager does. And it doesn't replace what other role players in a typical design, construct, and manage project, what happens in there. It doesn't necessarily replace that. So I think that that's just, as Cassandra said, the first thing to grasp about BIM, and then also understand that it's not here to replace anyone, but instead to facilitate collaboration that'll make information more available in real time, and help with some of the other aspects which I mentioned earlier, which go into inspections, to improving maybe pace or foreseeing problems, etc. Thank you.
That's 100% correct, Zama.
Thank you.
Thanks, Zama. That was a great overview. Thanks for that clarity. Yeah, I actually realized I didn't even introduce myself in the beginning of this session, so apologies. But I'm Georgie Herbert from Zutari. I'm a civil engineer. I should have said that way up front, but just thought I would put that in there. And just one more thank you very much to the panelists, and yeah, to CISA for organizing this Imbizo for 2021. I think now that all the questions seem to be done, I would like to hand over to Janko Banda. Janko, I think you are here. Okay, great. Yes, I've been. Thanks, Janko. I will hand over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Okay, mine is just to reflect and just summarize the conclusion, some resolutions over the last 2 days. But before going into that, I'd like to apologize for the sound quality. We're having challenges, which is sometimes a bit synonymous with online, well, the new norm that we're under in. So we'd like to apologize on that, but we hope that you did get some good pointers and you got the gist of the Imbizo. So without wasting any more time, before commencing, I'd like to tell you all a small engineering story, but not really, I'm just joking. So I think what, in terms of reflecting, I think we've had very insightful presentations from all our speakers, and we've had very fruitful engagements with our speakers. So thank you very much to the speakers who volunteered their time, and when they were called upon, actually heeded the call and the challenge to come engage us as young professionals. And thank you to the YPs as well for, you capitalizing on these opportunities, because at the end of the day, this is our Imbizo as young professionals. This is our platform for us to engage with like-minded young professionals as well as seasoned professionals, and to just pick their brains and ensure that we gain as much insight or gain as much knowledge from them. So as noted, or as the standard, with every conference, there are some resolutions or takeaway points. And the whole point of the resolutions or identifying resolutions is for us to, in a year's time or 2 years' time, to us go back and say, this was the plan, how did we action it, and from the planned activities, what has been achieved. So this way, it helps us to see if we're moving forward, and if we have what progress has been made, what are the areas of improvement, and it just to sort of like, encourage us to say, yes, we are making strides, so let's continue, with the work at hand. And the whole point as well of adopting or having resolutions to adopt is to call of us, it's to prompt us, all of us, to like action out some of these things, or to become active members of the community, because the profession is ours and it's up to us to protect it and act within it. And if we don't do anything about it, I'm not saying it's gonna die, but at the end of the day, it's up to us to ensure that we safeguard our profession. So it's up to us to stand up and make sure that we do the things that need to be done to safeguard it. Let us do the engineering. That is our job. We are the ones who went to school and are gaining the knowledge to ensure that we cater to society, because that's what engineering is all about. Coming up with solutions for challenges that we understand as members of society. And then at the end, it's just to inspire all of us to say, in our own small ways, let us be people of impact. So greatness is within us. I mean, just by us being here today, it shows that we are vested in the profession. We are interested in making a difference. So let's just go onwards and upwards. So in terms of points that have been raised over the 2 days, these are just some of the key ones, which I think I'd like to comment on, or I'd like to reiterate responses that were given. One of the things raised was to say that why don't you look at having a student chapter? But I think in this instance, collaborations are key. If there's too many people doing the same thing, what makes you stand out from the other person? So I know CISA and SAICI have signed an MOU, and as CISA YPF, we have a very strong young professionals footprint, whereas a VA such as SAICI, also from SAICI, seeing as I'm a civil engineer, has a very strong student footprint. So why don't we collaborate with them? As Renee highlighted in her acceptance speech, or when she was coming in as the chairperson, we have started initiatives where we collaborate with SAICI student chapters to bring students to attend our events. And those are the type of things we just piggyback off each other's events and make sure that we broaden our reach, and where we are strong, let others come and capitalize on those things, and they might add value instead of them also starting the same thing, which will end up diluting or saturating the efforts that everybody is undertaking. Then in terms of EXA mentors, there isn't really a database out there, but I believe, or from I think my experience, as I recently also obtained my professional status, I believe that through my engagements or my participation on platforms such as CISA and SAICI, it helped me grow my networks, which then aligned me with the correct people who could then help and support me towards that level where I could actually register. Or even now, there are people that I can call on if I'm unclear on something, or just need a sanity check or ethical check. So I think by engaging with like-minded people, you will get to then be connected with mentors who are EXA registered. Remember that by us committing or registering professionally with a body like the Engineering Council of South Africa, in a sense, we have to give back. We need to be the mentors we wished we had, or the mentors that we had. So we are here by engaging and attending events and networking. You are in essence then creating those opportunities to be connected with an EXA mentor. And I think one of the key things that was coming out, especially today, was that transparency is key. We're facing a lot of challenges, both as young professionals and senior professionals. And I think we just need to engage. You might feel like you're going through something by yourself, but by being honest about it, then people are able to help come up with solutions that are practical and fit for purpose for you or for the industry as a whole. In terms of creating opportunities, there was someone who asked, how can we create opportunities for vocational work or in service for varsity students as this helps them to graduate? I mean, that's something we could look into. I don't think there was a definite response, but I mean, it's a challenge. It's something that as the new committee is coming in, or is going to come in, they can look at how can we then capitalize on this, even if after 2 years we haven't created those opportunities. But if we've laid the groundwork, when the next committee comes in, they can just build onto that until we can then have something sustainable, which will then mean that we as a forum are continuously achieving our visions and our missions, which is also to, empower young people. Then in terms of CISA sharing projects and recognizing volunteers, I mean, that was highlighted a lot. We already have the CISA Aon Engineering Excellence Awards, and I'd really encourage each and every one of you to enter, whether as a young engineer or to enter some of the projects that you are working on. It's a good way to get yourself as an individual out there because you are a brand, but to also highlight the good works that you and your company are doing out there. And it's just to show people out there that, hey, engineers also have style. I know a lot of people think that we are very dull people. And then in terms of initiatives, I mean, there's quite a number of initiatives that are happening. We have drives where we celebrate youth, we celebrate women. But I think the key thing in terms of being recognized for volunteerism, it's just to say the onus is on you. You can also suggest things to us, propose initiatives, but there are some things that are already there. So let's not try, as indicated earlier, sometimes when you try to overdo something, you end up spoiling the recipe. So what we have is currently working. Let's just look at maybe ways of improving it or ways of adapting it and making it a bit better. And then I think the other key thing that was coming out is that we need to also educate ourselves on other topics such as bullying, because I think one of the key things is that some of us are not aware that we might be bullying people. We just think that we are very assertive or we know what we want, or some of us are not even aware that we're experiencing it. I mean, it was highlighted that I think one of the key things is that you can't create, there's no such thing as a work-life balance. It's more like having a work-life harmony or work-life choices, which then influence how your well-being as an individual. And from today, I think the key thing that was coming out is to say that digital engineering is the future. So I think moving forward, let's just adapt and let's be engineers. I mean, we are problem solvers. We're supposed to be innovative. And sometimes being innovative is not about creating the next coming up with the next groundbreaking solution, but it's about improving on what is there. It's not about creating something new, but it's also about just improving on what is there to make it better and more user-friendly, so to speak. In terms of the resolutions from this year's YPImbizo, as I indicated earlier, the whole point is that from these engagements, we need to have some takeaway pointers and we need to plan and put most of these into action. So the key ones, as indicated in the previous slide, is that collaborations are key. No one man is an island. And I mean, as we work, as professionals, one begins to appreciate the fact that we don't work in silos. So let's engage with there are a lot of other VAs or there are a lot of other people doing great work. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. If there's something that somebody has already done and you really feel you can add value, engage them. I'm sure they'll appreciate those things. And together we are stronger, divided we fail. We need to be diligent in the way we work or carry out our duties. And I mean, if you Google the word diligence, it just says that we show care. And at the end of the day, we as engineers are responsible for lives in magnitudes. So I think by being diligent, it shows that you care about the profession, but it also shows that you are proud of the profession that we are in. So I really encourage each and every one of us that let's be diligent in how we work, whether it's be in our private spaces or even in the office spaces, but let's be diligent. Let's treat each other with respect. Let's respect the profession, which will ensure that we always do the required checks and we put out quality works, because when things go bad, who gets blamed first? It's always the engineer. But if we have done or undertaken the due diligence, we can then protect ourselves and show that we did the correct work. Maybe someone else along the pipeline did not follow instructions, hence this is where things went wrong. And we can learn from that. It's not to say everything that fails, there's no opportunity to learn that. When things fail, it's a first attempt in learning. Let's take some key pointers and learn how we can avoid and improve on those systems. Another key thing was to say, let's strive for work-life harmony. I liked how the doctor put it, to say you can never really find balance, because when you say balance, it's like you have to let go of certain things. And another key point that came out in terms of this work-life harmony was Barifile to say, it's all about the choices that you make. So let's prioritize our time. let's learn to let go of things that do not build or enhance us, and let's learn to establish boundaries. The fourth point is that we need to continue raising awareness. And raising awareness can be calling out bullying or finding more information about bullying, finding ways on how we can be more diverse as an industry, how we can improve on our leadership skills, how we can close the gaps in terms of inequality, how we can improve service delivery. So we as the young people, we are the voice of the profession. So let's stand up proud and loud and, you know, continue making ourselves visible. Somehow over the years, it's like engineers have fallen to the wayside. I mean, we're not on decision-making tables. How did that happen? I think it's because for too long we've been so quiet. So I really implore each and every one of us here, like fly the engineering flag high, continue to raise awareness about certain things, educate people and make them aware of what is it that you do. If there are any misconceptions, teach people, you know, tell them what exactly is engineering, show them how we are an important member of society and the decision-making process. And let's just get involved, you know. Engineers are scared to get involved. I don't know why, but get involved. This leads to my next point, active volunteerism. Not everything has to have a monetary value. I think from my personal experience, having been an active member of the engineering community and an active volunteer of the engineering community, there are many skills that I have picked up that I did not learn at tertiary, and I might not have learned if I hadn't been involved, if I hadn't thrown myself out there, if I hadn't committed myself to being a custodian of this profession that I've, you know, that I love, that I studied towards, that I'm aspiring to be the best in. So I really encourage each and every one of us to get involved, you know, be an active member of the community, even if you're not at the forefront, you know, but speak up, engage, be part of the conversation. Don't just sit on the sidelines. The sixth point is that the only constant is change. So we need to adapt. I think today's session was very key in showing us that, and I think the whole, since 2020, the whole COVID-19 experience has taught us that definitely nothing is constant. And if you don't adapt, you die. I mean, who would have thought that 2 years or last year, or 2 years ago, actually, who would have thought that we'd be engaging in such a platform from anywhere in the country, or even, I'm sure there's some people outside of South Africa who are watching us. So I think let's, you know, continuously adapt to the changes that come about. Just because the YPF has been here and we've been doing things like this for so many years, it does not mean we can't change. We constantly adapt. We're constantly adapting. And as young people, we are the innovators. We the ideas people of the professions. So get involved, you know, bring about the change that is required. Make engineering sexy again, you know. And the seventh point, I think that is key, is that as young people, we need to identify legal reforms that will empower us as engineers to close the various gaps that we've spoken about. I mean, there's the gap of service delivery, there's the gender gap, there's the age gap, there's the pay gap. So I mean, let us find ways, you know, let us get involved. As indicated earlier, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. And as engineers, we've been on the menu for so many years. Let's get involved in the political frameworks. I mean, the political sphere. Let's be change makers. That's what we are. We are here to bring positive change. We are here to make lives better for society. Let's do that in all aspects of it. So what next from here? Aluta continua. Victoria, etc., etc. That's a new term that I actually learned, the bottom phrase. We all know about Aluta continua. So I don't really want to say that there's a struggle, but we haven't quite gotten to the end goal. We haven't quite gotten to the point where we are treated with the same respect and we are treated with the same dignity as your medical professionals or your legal professionals. Let's be out there. Let's continue to fight to be identified and be respected as a profession. And the second part, which says Victoria Aseta, it means that victory is certain. Biki Matmir, you know, it just takes with every YPImbizo, with every event, with every initiative, it brings about a certain change. I mean, who would have thought 50 years ago that you'd have so many diverse females in the in engineering space. So let's just continue, fighting, and let's just continue putting our hands up. Let's continue being visible. Let's continue. Yeah, let's make noise. Let's be loud. Let's be proud of our profession and let people know that we are change makers. We are innovators. We are the ones who are here for society. Use us. Tumatina, we are here, And then to conclude, for young professionals, I'd like to encourage everyone who's in attendance here today that I think people who know me will know that I really love Kofi Annan quotes, and I've got two of his here. For young professionals, I'd just like to say to you, you are never too young to lead, and you should never doubt your capacity to triumph where others have not. Just because someone has not succeeded, it does not mean that you will not. Even if you fail, I recently came across an acronym for FAIL, which means first attempt in learning. So as indicated, no one ever fails. If you fail, you just find a new way to improve. Failure gives you data that you can use so that you come up with solutions to how you can better that system. And just because you are young, don't think you don't know anything. There is something that as young people, we can teach the older generation. I mean, look at the advancements of today's speakers. I mean, talking about BIM. Who would have thought you'd get to a point where we're using such systems? And at some point, as senior professionals, we're not as involved technically. And this is where the young people can come in, take ownership, come up with that, speak up, raise your voice. Don't be afraid. I mean, the only stupid question is the one that was never asked. So rather ask something, but you will learn from it. Even if it's wrong, you will learn from it. I believe that throughout my career, every time that I have failed, those are the things that actually remain in my mind and where I feel like I've learned the most. And to our senior professionals who engage with us or who will eventually see this, I'd just like to say that have confidence in young people. Give them a chance and they will surprise you. I mean, yeah, it's self-explanatory. Look at the amazing presentations that we've had over the past 2 days from incredible young people that you wouldn't have known about. I mean, they've put up their hands, they're sharing whatever they're doing. They're showing us that, what, the world is your oyster. The possibilities are endless. So go out there, forge your path, make a difference, be an impactful young being. And yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much to our sponsors, whom without their continuous support, we would not be able to be bringing you such initiatives or such engagements. We would not be able to share the works that we are doing out there as young professionals. We would not even be able to engage with each other and network with each other. So thank you very much to all our sponsors. May you continue to be the wind beneath our wings as young professionals. And thank you very much to our speakers throughout the 2 days. Thank you for your time and the efforts that have been put in and your willingness to share and engage with like-minded young professionals, but also future leaders, and as well as teaching us, things that we might not have been exposed to. And yeah, thank you to the organizers. I know, COVID is presenting different challenges, but I think as young people and as CISA, we are definitely rising to the challenge and it can only get better from here. So thank you very much. I hope we'll put into effect everything that we've learned, or a few things that we have learned. As the doctor said, sometimes just pick 2 or 3 things. Let's be the voice of engineering. Thank you very much.